Welcome to another episode of Preparing for the Unexpected. I'm your host, Alex Fullick, and as always, we like to talk about things related to resilience, business continuity, emergency management, testing, well-being, COVID, anything that can help you, your organization, or your community prepare for, respond to, and overcome adverse situations. If you'd like to be a guest on the show, please feel free. You can find me on LinkedIn. I'm the only Alex Fullick there. I'm really easy to find, and I do respond to everything I get. Longtime listeners and viewers, you'll know that sometimes I try to get speakers from conferences that I've attended or was interested in trying to attend. Had some hiccups this year, but I was still lucky enough to get one of the speakers from DRJ Spring 2023 in Orlando this year. And I'd like to welcome to the show someone who had two topics there this year, Ray Holloman. Ray, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
And some people may recognize you because you made a quick appearance at a previous episode that James Green and I did back in, I guess almost a year now, wasn't it?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. So welcome back for your second appearance.
Thanks. I'm glad to be back.
I'm glad you reached out, and I'm glad, we connected and to get you on the show. Now, I know you and I have talked a little bit before, but could you take a minute or two and introduce yourself, what you do, and how you got into this crazy industry of ours?
Yeah, so currently I'm a senior program manager for enterprise disaster recovery for F5 Networks. I've been here approximately 11 months at this point. But prior to that, I was at HCA Healthcare, and that's how I got into this field. I was in my master's degree program in information security, took a really big interest into business continuity, disaster recovery. I actually did my capstone project on business continuity plans for the service desk because I had seen how basically anytime we needed to evacuate the building, we did it differently every single time because there was no rhyme or reason. It hadn't been updated for telework, anything like that. So that's how I kind of got in there. And then from there, a position to open up. They're like, hey, would you like to come join the disaster recovery team? I was like, that sounds great. And so I've been doing this ever since.
Well, I'm glad you're a part of the industry, and welcome to the industry. It's crazy. Now that I've said that, run fast. No, just
Yeah,
kidding.
I've been in it now, I guess, 10 years almost at this point. So I haven't got rid of me yet.
Well, welcome to the show. I'm glad you made it. And we're going to talk about, first of all, one of the subjects you talked about at DRJ, and that was about cloud testing, a new frontier. What were you talking about there?
Yeah, so with the cloud testing, really wanted to talk about how do we approach, from a public cloud, hybrid cloud, or from a SaaS cloud provider, how do we approach testing? Because sometimes the things aren't in our control anymore, especially if you start
Mhm.
using SaaS vendors and things like that. That's not necessarily in our control. And is it in your contract that you have disaster recovery, that you have backups? There's so much of the time where I hear people's like, it's in the cloud, we're protected. And I was like, no, just because you move to the cloud does not mean that you're protected. It just means that you've moved the responsibility of that infrastructure from being internal to external. But you still have to take care of your disaster recovery, your backups, and all those things. And a lot of people don't look into their contracts and see that they only take care of your production. You may not have anything there for disaster recovery because it may be your own responsibility to take your own backups and to do your own disaster recovery. And so just really getting people into that mindset of really looking at there are so many different ways to do cloud, and a lot of people are moving that way because they want to get out of the data center management space and they want to get
Mm.
more into moving into the applications and things. But all of those things that you were doing when that stuff was on-prem, you still have to do all of those same things when it moves into the cloud. Sometimes it can be a lot easier, but it doesn't mean that it's going to be any cheaper than what you were paying for when you were on-prem.
How is it easier? And how is it more difficult?
I would say it's easier because you don't necessarily have to have multiple locations yourself because your vendor may have multiple locations. So instead of you trying to stand up a disaster recovery data center, 500 miles away, you can use that vendor and just use that allocated space. So you aren't having to pay for that. But it's also a lot more difficult because you lose some control over the security, who accessed that building, things like that. That's where it can become a little bit more difficult depending upon what type of data you have inside of your data center.
So how do you go about doing a test then? Let's say between you and I, we're company A and company B, and I have to perform a test, but my stuff is in the cloud with your company. Do I tell you you have to be part of a test and tell you what you need to do? Or do you say, no, this is all we're doing, it's all you guys? Like how does that work?
It varies. I've seen where some contract was like, we're going to require you to do a test with us every September. I've also seen it where they're like, we're really hands off. You can come in here and do what you want. You can spin
Hmm.
up to another instance. A lot of times that's what I see is that they may be in a public cloud instance and they're like, you have the flexibility to spin up into this other instance and we're only going to charge you when you spin that up. So it really varies based upon what you put into that contract. But most of the time what I see from a from an organization that maybe is moving their stuff to the cloud, they'll probably pick a window where they used to do it on-prem. They'll just run all their exercises maybe for a week in that other location, and they just allocate the cost for that because that is one thing where you're only are paying for it now when you use it. So now you have to think about, okay, I'm going to use DR, so my cost for cloud is going to go up this month versus what it usually is where we're just running production month after month.
Does that kind of assume that, let's say I did that and I went and did all these tests at my vendor's location, does that assume that everyone at the vendor is available at my beck and call when I need them? Because
Oh,
they've got to have a role to play at some point. And just like my own organization, not everyone's going to be available at the snap of a finger.
yeah, and so that's something that you have to think about with moving to the cloud is that you are now one of many customers that they have. And so a lot of that is back to your contract. What does it say? And then what have you done as an organization to prepare so you don't have to have as much reliance? So a lot of that is going to be, have you put your applications into containers where you can redeploy them yourselves? Are you still looking at legacy infrastructure? I think we see a lot of that where you're looking at
Mm.
people that are using like mainframes and things like that, where you may have to have somebody hands-on to put the physical tape in. Do you have somebody that's close enough on ground? I've seen that where people have contracted to have somebody close enough that's like a dedicated person that can go and put their hands on the equipment if they need to inside of a vendor's uh, data center, just for that fact of they want somebody close to be able to say, okay, we can't wait for them to get to us, so we're going to have somebody there that we're going to be able to pull and have them go put hands on that infrastructure that we need at that time.
And that's got to be difficult because in some respects, I kind of need my own person there, right, all the time. And what's that person doing? So, am I just paying for that person to sit there in case they're needed? Or should I also be using that offsite as something else,
Yeah, a
which
lot of
adds more
times.
complexity?
Yeah, a lot of what I've been seeing is that a lot of people have been using that person as and been using these data centers not only as your disaster recovery, but they may be using it as user acceptance environments, being able to test something before it rolls out to production. Just something so it keeps it more active and keeps it more in use, and also allows a lot of times for it to stay better in sync with production if you're actually moving workloads over there more than just once or twice a year. If you're actually practicing, okay, we're going to run UAT over here for 6 months, and be able to, but knowing that if a disaster happens, we can blow that environment away and bring it back up. With our production environment inside of the recovery time objectives. And so it's really about how are we making these environments more flexible because
Mhm.
we all know that disaster recovery is a huge cost. And so I'm always thinking about what are creative ways that do not take away from my disaster recovery capabilities, but add benefit back to the company. And so a lot of that I'm seeing that, doing that acceptance of testing and not having to do it in full production, but in a lower environment sometimes really helps because hopefully you have the same gear in DR. And so you should be able to really get a feel for it and get people to play and train before they go to the real thing. And so that's one of the things that I've been trying to advertise to people is that yes, it's disaster recovery, but what other things can you use it for? Can you use it for a training environment? What can you use that for to maybe give you some more insights into how people are using it? What's the performance going to look like? What are your peaks and valleys? Because that way you're not doing necessarily in production, but you can see that long-term effect in that environment. And that makes that person that you have there for disasters not just be your disaster person, but be basically the manager of that data center. And so you have somebody there that's familiar with that environment. So you know they will be there and they're going to be familiar with the equipment versus just calling them up, when something happens, they're there
Mm.
kind of 40 hours a week maintaining that environment, seeing when things go bad because nobody wants to get into disaster and realize that half a cluster is down. But if you have somebody in there all the time, they'll know that cluster is down, it can be repaired. And so hopefully you don't have any interruptions if you do have to declare.
And I guess by utilizing that site, um, by you gave examples, UAT and other sites, development or QA and all kinds of other things.
Mhm.
Uh, you're helping people with the muscle memory as well on if this was a real situation, yeah, I just do this. But they're doing that every 2-3 months anyway, as part of, I guess, business as usual tasks,
Mhm.
moving things around, and which makes it a lot easier for when something actually happens. They already know, oh yeah, I can do this and this, instead of trying to find a notepad or
Mhm.
some big thick binder that tells them what they should and shouldn't do. They're already going to know.
Exactly. It's like, okay, like we just did this a couple of months ago. I know what it does, what I need to do. And it also helps for just training people as people rotate in and out of positions, in and out of companies. If you're doing this on a regular basis, then your people are going to stay up to date versus doing it maybe once, maybe twice a year. And then you have somebody that's new to the company and they're the person that's on call, but they've actually never done it. That can be like a scary thing for somebody that comes in
Yeah.
brand new and has never experienced this, but oh, we're doing this. This happens every 2 months or happens once a quarter. That gets people familiar with it because all of that prep and training, you know that it's coming up. So you're going to make sure that the new person knows, hey, this is where you go for this script. This is where this needs to move to on our rotation. And so it's something that doesn't get forgotten about because you're thinking about it continuously.
And I guess you could kind of cycle that role in, depending on where
Mhm.
that location is and how far it is away. But if it's not too far away, you might be able to cycle that role. 2 months it's Alex. The next 2 months it's Ray. Then it
Mhm.
goes to Jane, and then it goes to Sally. And then starts again, so that everyone on a team gets that same opportunity. Because then, if something does occur, we're all trained on it.
Mhm.
We're not. Oh, Ray's not there. Oh, we're screwed.
Right. Because I think that's so much of like what we get into. We get people that are very specialized in what they do. And so they're just like, oh, they're going to take care of it. But what if they're on vacation or they're out of the country or they're not accessible for some other reason? You need to ensure that you have other people there. And so, rotating that around, just like you said, makes it so that everyone is trained. And I think that's the thing where it's like you're making sure everyone's trained on how to do it and you're bringing them into it versus just saying, oh, we're going to have one person dedicated. That person may win the lottery and leave the company. And so then you're just kind of like, oh, what do we do now if something happens at that same time? But you're like, oh, then it's no big deal because, like, oh, I just did this last month. I know exactly what I need to go in and do. May need to check a note or a reference, but the muscle memory is there. And so then it's just more of a verification than having to like scramble and try to find a document that walks somebody through how do I move this from production to the DR to wherever it needs to go.
Agreed. Because you never know, and I've actually seen it where people have they participated in a test, they got to know how everything worked, and then within the next year, they moved on to a different position, and someone else came in And the management was thinking, yeah, we're ahead because we got people who know what to do. Well, actually, you don't. You just took a step backwards because that
Hmm.
person moved on, and now you're starting fresh again.
Yeah, that rotation of like key people, that's one of the things when I was doing a lot of test organizing is that I'm like, okay, you've already sent me this person twice this year. You've not sent me this person at all. Is
Mm,
there a reason for that? Because like we never know who's going to be on call, who's going to get the call. So if there's a reason or a skill set deficit, I need to know that because I have them as being in this department having this skill set. So if they don't have that skill set, I need to know that because I go look at your rosters and see who you have, and I'm just wanting to verify because I want to make sure that like we don't get into a place where you may have somebody that's senior, but you also need to tie that to a junior person. So that way they can learn. And then maybe the next time that junior person becomes a senior person, always in that rotation, because otherwise you get two, maybe three people who know how to do it, but then there's no capacity if it's a like in an exercise, like obviously we don't get everybody, but when it's all hands on deck and not everybody knows what they're doing, that can cause a lot of problems and cause delays in the recovery effort.
yeah, yeah, because you never know who's available. Like you said,
Hmm.
it could be anybody. It could be none of them too. And the people that
Exactly.
are available are simply untrained and have no
Exactly.
idea, which is just the same as having nobody.
Exactly. They're like, but they know IT. I'm like, that doesn't matter. Like,
I know
do
some
they?
IT, but I couldn't do it.
I'm like, do they have credentials into the system that I need them to log into? No, then they're no help to me.
Yeah. Now you've talked about contracts between let's say my company and your company. But what if I have a partner that's asking me how do I do my testing? How do you communicate that? Because my testing now is done differently with you than the way I would have done it before. I'm now in the cloud. So how do you communicate that to give a sense of confidence to my other partners that are out there now? Because that's a different aspect as well that they need to understand.
Yeah, that's definitely something that's becoming more and more prevalent. And so a lot of what I have been just even reviewing myself is just a lot of the SOC 2 reports from a lot of these vendors, seeing what they're going out there getting audited. I'm like, I get audited as an organization. I'm going to also, ask how are you being audited? What are you putting in place for disaster recovery? What's your testing schedule? What are you requiring of your vendors to do? So really starting to ask those questions and starting to see like, I don't need to see your full on disaster recovery plan, but I want to know that you are going through and auditing your customers or your vendors, making sure that that's in there. Are you holding them? And then the stuff that we're requesting from you, you know, are we able to hold you to the RTOs and RPOs that we have stated? Just
Mhm.
those type of things, making sure they get into that language of saying that like it every year I want to see some updated report saying that you've done what's the testing you've done, were you able to meet your objectives? Don't need to get into the details, but at least I know that you are complying with what you say you do as a program, which is we're doing the testing, this is what we're going through and verifying these things. This is what we're getting from our partner vendors to say that they're doing this testing. Here's how we're checking and making sure that our backups and everything that we need are all there. So it's really just going through and saying, yes, I want to trust that, you're going to withhold the bounds of our contract, but I'm also want to verify. So who are you having externally come in and vet you as well?
Yeah, because I want to make sure that as your organization with your vendor, you're meeting your recovery times or objectives. But as a partner to you, I want to make sure you're meeting the objectives and the service level agreement that we have established. Because
Exactly.
if you have a big situation, I know you're dealing with this other company and you have to meet their objectives. And if the objective is, for argument's sake, 24 hours with them, but ours is 12, did you meet my objective? No, you didn't,
Mhm.
because I'm already waiting 12 additional hours for you to come back online. So you're not meeting my SLA.
Yeah, and that's where having good documentation and knowing what are your customers' SLAs and what have you put into a contract really helps because we may think, oh, everybody's at 24 hours, but somebody may have a 12-hour. So now
Yes.
we've got to make sure that everything that we thought we had 24 hours to do, or for this customer, they may have 12. So what are we doing to ensure those 12-hour customers are getting back up before our 24 hours are getting back up? Because obviously there's probably some penalty if we
Hmm.
miss it. And so how are we tracking that in our processes, in our BIAs, in our tools, and when we're assessing, how are we tracking to make sure that we aren't promising more than what we're actually capable of doing?
Yeah.
Because sometimes that is what gets you into trouble.
Yeah. Over promise and under deliver.
Exactly.
We're coming to the end of this segment, Ray. Do you have any final thoughts or anything you'd like to say about cloud testing and the new frontier we're all faced with now?
Yeah, I would say that you really, look at your contracts and making sure that you have disaster recovery in there. Don't just assume that because you've gone to the cloud that you're protected. And so verifying that you have your backups, you have everything that you need from a disaster recovery perspective, because you don't want to get caught in a situation where you thought you had it and you actually don't, because that's going to take you a lot longer to recover from. So just ensuring that it's there. Just because you move to the cloud, you need to just verify that you still have that disaster recovery protection.
Well, thank you very much, Ray. We've come to the end of this segment. I really enjoyed that. I think it's a new challenge for a lot of people, because there was a time when we were just dealing with, one external client. Let's say we were dealing with a DR vendor,
Hmm.
and the considerations coming from external sources weren't really there. At least not to the point they are now. There's so much more in your face about all this stuff. So I think it's really interesting, and I hope everyone does open the drawers or the file folders, whatever they've got, and have a look at their contracts and find out, are you standing where you think you stand?
Exactly. I'm like, that's the biggest thing. Like, just go through and check, because there's always contract renewals where you can make changes. So know where you're at, because that's the only way you'll know what you need to change and what position you're in.
Yeah. And on that note, we've come to the end of the segment. Ray, thanks very much, and we will be right back with segment two. If you liked that video, thumbs up. If you didn't like that video, thumbs down. But leave me a message and let me know your thoughts. Of course, don't forget to subscribe. And in the meantime, stay prepared, everybody.